like to have this conversation. Um, we can start with the USAID and what's happening in international development with policy change globally, not just here in the United States. I can go straight into a short discussion, and then you can have you guys feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, or wait until the end, and we can have a discussion.
Maybe Johannes, maybe yeah, start by telling us about your role with USA, even with the World Bank. Some of the stuff a lot of the stuff that you did in development in Africa, even anything you want to share with the students to kind of let us know, because we don't cover that in the class, but other than just kind of the basic stuff that I covered, learning from you, the expert, kind of share with us what you've done and what the effect has been.
Sure. Yeah. So in international development is the area of professional work that deals with providing assistance to developing countries to help them develop and address developmental issues. And these could be economic growth, market reforms, regulatory reforms, helping countries with reduction in poverty, with better production in agriculture, improvements in market efficiencies, agricultural markets, water conservancy, environmental management, and in the extreme situation, international development assistance includes humanitarian assistance. These include, from conflicts, IDPs, displaced people from a conflict, climate calamities, and so on. And also includes drought, famine, management, and support. The part of international development I worked in, it's called private sector development. And, the role of the international development and private sector development is to help facilitate the growth in small businesses and creating conducive legal regulatory environment or enabling environment to help them grow. And the growth of small and medium businesses are critical to the development of countries and improvement of the standard of living of people in those countries. Because as in the US, 80% of employment is generated by small businesses. And so the growth and the health of small businesses, small and medium businesses, is critical to development of any country. And development meaning improvement in income, improvement in the quality of life that provides, but through business. And that entails, it could be helping to train business people on technology adoption, new management methods, capital acquisition, market access, trade, information technology, incorporation and adaptation, labor management, and so on and so on. And different types of programs are designed to support businesses. And then the flip side of that is supporting governments to be more business friendly, to reform regulatory burdens on small businesses, to provide support for businesses to grow in different sectors. It could be those involved in exports, for example. In many developing countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, their economy is based on agriculture. They're agrarian economies. So improving their agricultural exports is critical. So that starts from production and productivity, and then from harvest, packaging, managing, processing, and exporting. In many African countries and many developing countries, they focus their production mostly on subsistence crops and raw crops that are exported, even the cash crops like cashew, cocoa, sesame, and so on and so on, coffee, tea, And so a lot of work is done in value addition and helping countries semi-process so the agricultural raw commodities they export globally, so they can retain some of the value of what's exported. For example, you take coffee, raw green bean coffee fetches something like I don't know, like 5% of the value of coffee. When I say the value of coffee, when you go to Starbucks and order a latte, well, a latte is 80% milk, but the 20% espresso shot you buy, um, your the value of that is something like 10-20% of that value is retained from the producers who really work hard to produce good green bean coffees. The rest is retained by the value addition. Those who clean, process, roast, grind, and turn into your coffee, right? So the different stages of the value add system, the value chain, people make different levels of money. The more you add value, the more profit margins you have, the more money you make. So usually the farmers who produce these great coffee you drink every day just make basically subsistence uh, return, and that keeps them in a poverty trap. And so work international development organizations do is to help improve the lives of these farmers so they can keep producing coffee but also improve their lives, so they can send their kids to school, so they can have basic health care, they have so they can have potable water, toilet, and indoor plumbing, and so on. So the things you take for granted in the U.S. And these guys who produce these great coffee, tea, everything you consume from chocolate to I don't know, so many different things. Avocado uh, is produced by these poor farmers. So international development really provides support for improving the lives of these people. So where does the money come from for international development? Well, each country sets aside. When I say each country, mostly developed countries set aside a portion of their GDP or budget for international development. The U.S. is the most generous and the largest donor in the world, not surprisingly, because the U.S. is the largest economy in the world and the richest country in the world. Um, do other rich countries also provide proportional aid? Not always. The Europeans are second largest donors, and they've done well as well in terms of providing international development assistance. But Middle Eastern countries who per capita are richer than the U.S. or Europe have not really been as generous, for example, as the West. So all of that, though, has an important role in our lives here in the U.S. Besides, giving us access to great produce and products, but also keeping international peace, regional stability, geopolitical stability. All that matters to the U.S. You may say we have this big pond between us and the rest of the world, and we don't need to worry about security. Not necessarily. 9/11 is a good reminder uh, that trouble could come home if you don't have stability internationally. I'm not linking 9/11 to international development, but there are other forms, such as, for example, Afghanistan, Pakistan. If people's lives are better or improved, they have less reasons to take risks to throw away their lives. People who have better standards of living don't tend to resort to terrorism or other extreme form of engagement to resolve political disputes. And so uh, the gradual development of the world and eradication of poverty, uh, besides, the charity aspect of it and sharing your wealth and being a good global citizen, it also has benefit directly to you, and your safety and your development. And then beyond that, it also, these poor people become, and today they're recipients of your, development assistance. Tomorrow there'll be markets. If you look at South, Asia, Korea, Vietnam, Taiwan, all these countries in the 60s, they were dirt poor. I mean, I'm originally from Ethiopia. I remember learning from history that, in the 60s, the Ethiopian government sent food to South Korea. Imagine, South Korea is now providing food assistance to Ethiopia. you know so some of these countries now you think about as poor and feeble and hopeless could eventually become a market for American products and services. So there are many reasons why international development is important, and benefits the donor countries. Obviously, I'm a believer in international development, so I'm biased, but there are others who don't believe in that, and I respect their views as well. So when we come to USAID in general, so USAID was set up by a congressional act. I believe it was in 1961 under Kennedy, and has been providing international development assistance on behalf of the United States government and the people of the United States since then. And it's generally appropriated funds through Congress. It has a direct reporting line to the Secretary of State, but it's an independent agency. Was, I guess, I can say, was an independent agency until just a few weeks ago. There's still some disputes. There are some court cases pending. And this might be a constitutional crisis because it relates to the larger issues relating to independent agencies and whether independent federal government agencies could exist without reporting to the executive branch, meaning to the president of the United States. Many of these independent agencies were created by Congress. Just to name a few: the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Election Commission. All these are independent federal agencies established by Congress. They're accountable to the executive in many ways because they get their budgets from the executive, but funded directly by Congress. But they're independent. Their board is usually set with a majority of the ruling party, usually. As the boards are appointed by the president, and then the organization is run by an appointee um, of the president. And so USAID is the same way. And so we have this constitutional issue now pending in the courts. Mr. Trump is challenging that assumption. There's some legitimate constitutional issue in the three branches government arrangement, whether you can have an independent agency that's not accountable to the president. And the limits of the president's power is being tested through this judicial review right now. Anyhow, let me stop here. I don't want to go off on a tangent. This is an area that interests me as a lawyer, as someone who clerked in the federal courts in the past, and these are the issues that are usually debated and have huge implications on everyday issue. Anyway, let me stop here and see if anyone has questions.
We do have some questions. So can I ask you guys a favor? Because I want to make sure that Yohannes can see you. When you ask your question, just stand up so he can see you, right? If you don't mind. Can you work first? Go ahead.
Yeah.
And then introduce yourself and speak loudly.
Yohannes, nice to meet you. So I want to ask you on the front of, you mentioned earlier that,
This is how you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry.
He's so rude, Yohannes. He's literally my worst student, and he's not even enrolled in this class, okay?
I'm so weak. Like you said, I'm Roussel's worst student. But on the front of, you mentioned much earlier that you work, I assume, that you work with governments to help smaller and medium-sized businesses, what's the right word? In order to grow, right? So how exactly do you carry out those missions? Are you sending out people to discuss and teach and educate these businesses, or are you holding like a conference? Like how does your missions get applied?
A good, very good question. This is the how to question. Uh, and normally, projects are designed by USAID. They do studies. I mean, as you can imagine, there are many problems, many issues to address. And in a given country, you're not going to have enough funds or time to resolve every issue. So, an analysis is done by USAID initially, and they design a project based on that analysis, trying to see how to be catalytic, right? Where do you put money and get the biggest bang for the money? And I'll just give you an example of the last project in the field I managed. It was a $60 million project. It's a market systems project, meaning using market forces to multiply development investments. And in this case, we looked at what we call it enterprise growth, and how to improve enterprises to grow faster, that are innovative, that are risk takers, that have that are, organizations, small and medium businesses that have good management. And so you go through a screening process. And so we used, for example, the businesses have to be 3 years or older, because the small businesses usually, some like 80% don't make it beyond the 2 year cutoff, right? So we want to see growth oriented, really innovative businesses in different sectors that could grow, adapt new management, new technology, and be able to influence other businesses in the sector, right? And then generate income and employment. And what we did was, again, a market systems approach uses the market. We don't want to distort the marketplace by providing free service paid by USAID. So what we did was we hired BDS, or business development services providing firms, to be able to, on a performance based contracting, uh, to support identified SMEs. These SMEs have to have a minimum of certain revenue, and they have to have products. They're not startups, right? These are what we call early stage growth oriented firms. And and the BDS service providers have to be able to provide technical assistance to help grow these businesses by a 10% or more, on a year-to-year basis of the business. You look using the tax returns, the year before's tax return. And the BDS providers, um, so 70% of their payout is tied to meeting this 10% business growth requirement, right? And 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 so part of it will be the BDS providers will do a diagnostic assessment of the SME. Initially, they look at the business and they try to see what the gaps are that is sort of holding them up from growth. It could be internal management, could be their marketing strategy, could be their product, could be their sourcing, inventory management. They'll look at everything under the hood, and then provide a recommendation. And that recommendation will be reviewed by the business owner, and they have to have an agreement on the key catalytic change that the business has to make to grow. Once the business agrees and they sign an agreement, and then they go into an implementation mode, and throughout the year, the consulting firm will work with the SMEs and helping them implement these reforms, improvements in their business process. Um, and then by the end of the year, they get reviewed. And when they're submitting their sales and income to the government for tax, we'll see, whether they were able to grow their business by at least 10%. Now, 10% seems a lot in the U.S., but in developing countries, it's not, because inflation usually is, in many of these countries, is a double digit. So you're like literally barely growing inflation plus 1 or 2%, or at the level of inflation. So The key thing is not in that 1 year improvement that you're seeing, is in the second, third, fourth year. Once you implement these reforms, how the business will be growing. But you want to see the business moving in the right direction. So that 10% is a minimum to make sure at least you're not holding back the business. All right. The first rule of assistance is do no harm. What you do has to help the business grow, and has to set the business on a runway to take off in 2-3 year down the road. Now, by the way, this type of assessment comes from the world of private equity. So impact investors normally use this method, this process, for early stage growth oriented companies. Once they identify the potential of the company, and they look at investing, because they want to be able to exit in 5 years, right? So they want to be able to support the business with some reform, some adoption of new technology, process, a new market, and so on, and then grow the business by year 5, they exit. For development investment, you want to see these businesses growing. So in the first year, it sells, but then the second year, you want to see employment growing to support the growing business, right? On the back end of it, also, we provide other types of BDS services, for example, for access to financing. Finance is like oxygen to businesses, especially small business. Without working capital, you can't grow, right? If you're using the only assets you have, the only cash on hand you have, you put the business at risk, your own wealth at risk. And so it becomes a challenge. And to avoid that, you work with banks and other form of financing to help these businesses access the right type of credit and the right type of terms to help grow the business. But that financing has to support the business, and the business has to be able to support the financing. Again, the financial arrangement, the access to finance assistance, also is based on performance-based arrangement, and the businesses have to have a skin in the game, meaning the support that we provided in terms of international development assistance is not 100%. It's 70% of the cost of the BDS. 30% has to be covered by the businesses. Without So this is kind of an innovation in international development. Providing free service has adverse effect. It distorts the market, but also creates a moral hazard. It creates dependencies, and you get into this cycle that is not going to improve people's lives or the well-being of people in the countries that you're trying to support. Maybe I give you a long-winded answer and example, but I hope you sort of have an idea how like one type of programming works.
I want to say, Yohannes, I really appreciate it. I know some of the stuff that you're talking about, I know I'm going to have to go into it because you're giving them like graduate level stuff a little bit. How many of you have heard of moral hazard here before, right? So thanks a lot. That's a 15-minute lecture from me coming later on. But I love it. Moral hazard is fun. But I did have another student who had a question also, right? Go ahead. Introduce yourself. Speak loudly. There's a speaker right there. I'm sorry? What? Oh, Yohannes. His name is right here. Yeah. Yohannes. He'll respond to Youssef. He's really easygoing.
Nice to meet you, Yohannes. I'm Josiah. And my question was, if your task was to increase domestic manufacturing stability, how would you go about that, and what incentives would you place? Like, for example, the coffee beans, how did you capitalize that towards domestic growth when they're already involved in such a large scale, publicly known and competitive market?
And domestic. Yeah, okay.
Can you repeat the question?
You put it to the microphone, but you gotta speak up.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, is this good?
I got parts of it, but please simplify it and repeat the question. Thank you.
I was just asking, how would you, what would your strategic be between, behind making
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, stronger with manufacturing and stability within itself?
I think he was asking Johannes about your work, which I know you were very involved with. Maybe if you want to talk about how you helped create these co-ops with coffee bean farmers in Ethiopia, like basically to strengthen, that agricultural area in initial with the investment funds and the business. This is helping them be independent from commodities market, which I know is very specific, but he was asking about coffee as well, using your example from earlier.
Yeah, there's I think also a part of it that talked about how it would create stability, uh, something like that, right? You mentioned something, how the investment could help create stability. Is that accurate? Did I get it right?
Within Ethiopia.
Yeah, within Ethiopia. So yeah, I mean, good question. Coffee is very important to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. There are about 25 million people involved directly and indirectly in the production, processing, marketing, exporting of coffee. So it's a huge part of Ethiopia's 130 million population. And beyond that, there's, coffee has its own cultural and other importance. But from economic development process and livelihood perspective, uh, you know, 25 million people live off of, production of coffee. So as a government, the Ethiopian government, takes coffee very seriously. Now, are they doing enough? Most people probably say not enough, considering the importance of coffee. But from an international development perspective, what could be done? What are the things that have been done, and are being planned to be done? Terry mentioned the coffee exchange. That was my first project in international development. During the financial crisis, I was offered an opportunity to work with the coffee sector and help set up a commodity exchange. A commodity exchange is like a stock market for commodities, physical products. It could be what we call soft commodities like coffee, tea, cocoa, or hard commodities like metals, gold, silver, platinum, and so on and so on. But it's an organized market that helps create transparency and efficiency in the trading of commodities. So the physical commodities market we helped set up in Ethiopia was what we call a spot market, meaning you buy and sell of physical commodities on spot, right? And many of the markets in the U.S. or in the West, they're derivatives market or futures market. That only about 3% of the commodities are delivered to the buyers, so they're used mostly as a financial hedge, as a financial instrument. So coming back to Ethiopia, the commodity exchange leveled the playing field between the different players in the coffee value chain, right? From farmers usually produce the coffee. They're the most important players, but the least powerful people in the business. The exporters tend to be the most powerful and the guys who make the most money out of the green beans produced. And in between, you have different players. You have what you call aggregators, people who buy from small holders, small producers, aggregate the coffee and then bring it to the market. And then you have the exporters who buy the green coffee, process it, and then ship it internationally. And in the old days, the disparity in bargaining power between the producers and the exporters meant that the exporters dictated price and the producers were price takers. They were not price makers, meaning they were dictated how much their coffee was worth. The buyers would come and say, "This is how much I'm going to pay you, take it or leave it." And that usually meant they were on the losing end of the international value chain, meaning all the way to your local Starbucks. Prices set here in the West, and Starbucks decide how much to buy green beans. By the way, Starbucks doesn't buy coffee directly from farmers. They usually use German multinational buyers who come to countries like Ethiopia and buy coffee. And then at the end, the last guy to get a cut from the total value of coffee traded is the farmer. While the government and international development partners don't have a control over the international market, they do have some level of influence on the local market. So the creation of a transparent, modern, level playing field, the marketplace redistributes some of the value by creating a transparent place where people have the right to say no or sell their products based on their value, right? So that market eventually, it gradually, it didn't happen overnight. Now the market is about 18 years old and trades about, I think, about $1.5 billion worth of commodities a year. uh, was able to educate the farmers about their rights, the value of their products, provide them with the market prices, and both international and national prices, so they can have better bargaining powers, um, and also force the exporters who normally dictated prices based on unreasonable terms to be able to trade, to buy this coffee on a transparent marketplace, a fair market price. And that redistribution of some of the money to farmers allow farmers to send their kids to school, buy them shoes, basic necessities of life, building, uh, you know, proper housing and access to medical care, and so on and so on. That improvement, in the livelihoods of people in the coffee producing areas could be directly correlated with levels of violence and stability. You'll be amazed, the core in terms of the correlation. So a stable region, a stable coffee producing country, a stable population, a healthy population creates stability. Now, Ethiopia is prone to a lot of conflict, just like a lot of countries in Africa. And you'll be surprised, most of the conflict in Ethiopia is not in the parts of the coffee producing area, which is mostly in the southern part of Ethiopia. So it's a good thing, right? The more you develop an area, the more people have a stake in their livelihood. They have a better livelihood. The less likely conflict is to start, and the people are going to be more productive members of community, and also helps the international supply chain with better produce coffee reaching the global market. So good question. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Thanks, Yohannes. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. By the way, so, this is actually, I lied earlier, Tom Pick is not my worst student. This is my worst student right here. No, he's a tutor. He's a great student and he's a class tutor. I've got two of them. And so, one day he hopes to be like you, but I don't know if that's gonna happen. Anyway, Anand, go ahead.
This is my worst. This is my worst professor.
That's right.
I just had a question about can you confirm, is it true with Ethiopia and Eritrea that they feel, because Ethiopia is landlocked and you're talking about exporting and the businesses, the development within Ethiopia, is Ethiopia like it feels threatened or it feels insecure about its borders and about its, because I believe with Eritrea they trade externally through their port city since they don't have the sea. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a hot topic right now. It's yeah, in the last few days there have been a lot of development, including the Saudis yesterday announcing they're going to invest $1 billion in the port of Asab, which is the southernmost port on the Eritrean coast. Um, for historical reasons, because of the scramble for Africa in the 1880s, Ethiopia was left landlocked. Even though historically Ethiopia had ports, going back to a couple of millenniums, and Eritrea, the people of Eritrea are ethnically and culturally are pretty much the same as the people of Ethiopia. The same language, same history, same religion, but just like much of Africa, borders were drawn by colonial powers, and so Ethiopia and Eritrea were separated, namely by the Italian conquest of Eritrea. So that left Ethiopia border without a port, and after independence, Ethiopia, the ruling parties and ironically, the ethnic group that led Ethiopia and Eritrea were the same ethnic group. So spoke the same language. They were allies during the civil war in the 80s, but they had a split, and so they were not able to get along, and that led to Ethiopia using the port of Djibouti uh, as its main port. And because of that, as the only outlet for a country of 130 million people, the third largest economy in Africa, uh, with lots of trade, Djibouti has prospered, right? And Eritrea has not, and lost out on an opportunity to really help its people, but also help Ethiopia, because the port of Asab is the closest port for Ethiopia than Djibouti. I mean, Ethiopia would it would shave like 300 or so kilometers from terms of the length, the distance to the port. So, yeah, that has been a big geopolitical issue percolating, and there are also claims that the port of Assa, which was sold to the Italians by a local uh, leader of an ethnic group that um, inhabits the region, and their dispute whether it was a sale or was a lease, and so that leads to claims and counterclaims, and so that issue is a potential flash point, and we hope and pray that nothing will happen, and we'll continue to use the port of Djibouti, and Ethiopia will keep growing the way it's growing. The other port and development that Ethiopia is looking to use is the port of Lamu in Kenya, in northern Kenya, on the Kenyan coast. That port is partially completed, and eventually will serve the southern part of Ethiopia. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It would be a disaster if there's another war with Eritrea.
And with Eritrea and Ethiopia, would the answer really be conflict in the future, or are they currently in the progress of diplomatic easing?
Hard to tell. Some days things are good, some days are not. But it's been this way since Eritrea became independent 30 years ago. It's unfortunate. The closest people should be friends, and even form some sort of affiliation or union, and not be in conflict. But politics has its own ways of creating enemies between even family members. So I don't know. Hard to tell.
It'd be just as ridiculous like as the United States picking a fight with Canada.
Canada.
Anyway, I have Kalia. I can see Kalia is anxious to ask you a question, and she's going to turn her video on to do that. So thanks, Kalia.
I definitely would like to turn my video on, but I'm like literally in my bonnet. So I don't think that would be the
Go ahead,
appropriate.
Kalia.
So
No
my
problem.
question is, what are some of the biggest legal challenges small businesses face when trying to expand internationally?
Oh, very good question. I have a project right now in Tanzania I'm working on with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and it's a port improvement um, project, and it's not just port, it's really export import improvement. But the bottleneck is around customs mostly. So small businesses struggle to meet the burdensome requirements of local governments, meaning their own country governments. There's corruption. Corruption is the biggest problem at the top of the problem list. And then you have logistics issues, not having enough cold chain if you're exporting agricultural commodities. You want a cold storage at the port. You want to have cold chain, meaning cold trucks that are refrigerated. You want to have containers. Reefer containers are refrigerated containers. You want to have a pack house at the farm or near the farm where products are properly processed and packaged. You have packaging issues. Um, so destination markets are very picky, especially Europeans, are very difficult. The European Union has its own rules in general, but they also country by country also different rules for health and safety issues. And many of these health and safety issues, they're what we call technical barrier to trades. Some of them are put in place on purpose to make it difficult for others to trade with their country, meaning they want to protect their market, their farmers. And so small businesses struggle because the cost of compliance to produce, prepare, process, ship their produce to destination markets is very high. And then when they reach their destination markets, the destination markets have all these requirements. If you don't meet those requirements, they can detain, they can throw them out, they can burn them, they can charge you additional amount for various reasons. Now, larger businesses, on the other hand, have the muscle to comply with all these issues and be able to fight both locally and internationally. And so, what you see is the growth of small businesses. Normally, a healthy economy, you want to see small businesses growing to from small to medium, eventually to large. Not all of businesses end up being large businesses, but there's a healthy percentage of small businesses that should be growing into large businesses over time. And what we saw in Tanzania is that over 20 years, in fact, the number of small businesses that were able to survive 2, 3 years went down. Forget growing to mid-size, but the larger businesses continued to grow even larger and became monopolistic. That's not healthy. And large, most of the problems were associated with local customs improvement issues, and then destination market issues. For example, on quality assessments, right? Laboratory quality assessments, so you don't have forbidden metals, chemical residues from like chemical inputs on farmlands. Packaging issues, packagings are regulated. Certain types of packages are not allowed. Even the way you print labels on your packaging is regulated. So if you don't meet all these requirements, it's very hard to be able to export and reach a market. And many of the most successful small business exporters are affiliated or have a partnership with bigger partners internationally, or have support from NGOs or development partners to be able to navigate these issues. Hope I was able to answer your question. That was a great question.
You did. I do have one more question. Um, in your book, what is considered a small business? Is it like a company that has 50 employees or less, or like how is that defined?
So yeah, it depends by country. Like in the US, it's 50 or less. In Africa, if you have 50 employees, you're a big business. So a small business. So so there's okay. The different categories are, you start with micro enterprises. Micro enterprises are people with 1 or 2 people or 3 people. And then you have what they call MSME, micro and small enterprises. These are firms that have 10, 15 employees. And then medium-sized employees are, employee firms are with employees of about 30, 25, 30 people. And then above that, it becomes, at least in developing countries, what we call big business. If you have 100 employees, you're considered big.
Johannes, I wanted to, by the way, Kalia, was that good? Did he answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. That was good. Thanks, Kalia. I want to kind of switch gear a little bit. Again, kind of in keeping things in context of what's happening and with your expertise and, kind of like what's happened in the past. So with an administration that's kind of retrenching away from the world, right? And specifically focusing on the continent, on Africa. Do you see that now that again, closing out USAID and maybe diminishing trade and increasing trade barriers and tariffs, what do you see as the role of China in Africa in terms of opportunities for more development, for more dealings with their Belt and Road initiatives, and then and then how, if that's going to be the case the next 4 years, and what that might mean for Ethiopia?
Very good question. So, this is a very complicated issue. Now, if you go to Africa, where I spent a lot of time over the last 15 years, most Africans welcome Chinese investment for a good reason, because since independence, investment in infrastructure has not really materialized, right? Unless the national governments do the investments, not a whole lot of foreign investment is coming. So in many of these countries, they were able to develop really critical national infrastructure using Chinese investments. When I say investments, is a little trickier. So it's not in the way you think of it. There are investments like private sector investments where the Chinese build hotels, they build out of factories and so on and so on. But I think the most important investment the Chinese are making are infrastructure investment. They provide financing, cheap financing, to build dams, to build roads, rail, power lines, water treatment centers. And these are really, really important, critical national infrastructures. Now, they come with a debt attached to it, right? They're not cheap. The Chinese are the most competitive infrastructure developers in the world. They'll beat anyone in the world. Quality wise, they have different ranges of quality. And it's really up to the national governments to hold the Chinese accountable. In some countries where the national governments are weak, you see some abuse. Some of the quality is really poor. In some countries where they had a proper relationship with less corruption, the Chinese could be very corrupt as well. And they've been able to maneuver and get the best and the most out of the Chinese. But on balance, at least in Africa, the Chinese are viewed in a positive way as net contributors to the development of the continent, not as in the way you see in popular media here in the West, as vultures, as taking advantage of poor people. Not really. They've exposed a fault line, right? Most of the West, like, Americans are not interested in investing in Africa. Americans don't invest in Africa. Most of the American investment in Africa is around oil and gas, and in just select few countries. If Americans are involved in any other part of the economy in Africa, it's through their European subsidiaries, or a European multinational owns an American subsidiary that's involved in Africa. Europeans are a lot more involved, and they understand Africa because the Europeans have been in Africa, for generations through colonialism and other interests. But the relationship with the West has been very extractive, right? The Europeans built infrastructure during colonialism, but they built infrastructure to remove resources from Africa and ship it to the West for processing. So if you see a railway or a highway, it's usually goes from a mine to the port, a road from the mine to the port, right? It's really designed to serve their business, not really the local development needs. The Chinese, on the other hand, the the infrastructure projects were designed, developed to serve local issues, local needs. The Chinese are also in the extractive business, right? They're in there. You see in Zambia, in DRC, where there are a lot of resources. The Chinese have invested, provided loans in exchange for minerals. Again, Africans have been exporting minerals, but no infrastructure has been built. It's only when the Chinese came that the infrastructure started to get built. Um, so, I mean, there's some dark side to their Chinese involvement. I'm just completing a study now through a NED grant that deals with what they call malaligned investments. These are investments um, made not just for a return, financial return, but also with a view of influencing local and regional geopolitical issues. In this case, the worst offenders are not the Chinese, it's Middle Eastern investors like the UAE and gold and other things, building airports but their investment is designed to influence governments for geopolitical and other issues, right? And in many cases, they don't really benefit local populations. The Chinese also have done it. Europeans also have done it. So it's a different uh, area of interest because they have corrosive influence uh, on weakening democratic institutions. In Africa, there's a nascent democratic movement in some of these countries, and these investments are not helpful to that democratic development of the continent. So let me stop. I can keep going forever. The Chinese issue is very complex in Africa.
Thanks, Yohannes. Okay, I'll go for another question, because they're be shy today. Oh, wait, we have another one. Awesome. You did great, by the way.
So when you see, how do you deal with competition between small and large scale companies? Like for a company who's small and can't afford to pay healthcare insurance or the salary of a large scale company, how do they compete and how do they grow?
So normally they try to avoid competing with each other, right? Because uh, I mean, they try to specialize in different aspects of the business value chain. It's really hard for a small business to compete with a large business. Um, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And sometimes the small businesses are nimble and able to beat the big businesses. They may be innovative, but in place like Africa and developing countries, the marketplace is not fair, right? Um, you don't have like the Federal Trade Commission here you have in the U.S. that you know protects businesses or persecutes against unfair trade practices. So, in many ways, small businesses avoid directly competing with large businesses, and they focus on niche areas. And sometimes they work with the large businesses and they become part of the supply chain and working with large businesses supplying the big businesses. But in other areas, there are disruptive businesses, right? Like for example, e-hailing in Africa has been a very interesting business model. Just like Here, they competed with traditional taxis, and taxis and governments didn't understand them, and there was violent reaction. And because they provided a solution to a real problem, I you know in Africa, the solution they provide is different than the West. In Africa, it's about affordability. And in the past, they may have paid basically for a round trip to because a taxi will charge you the return price as well, even though they're returning empty. E-hailing company like an Uber will only charge you the trip you used. So if you're basically Uber like e-hailing companies came to Africa and cut the price by half. And these traditional taxi services providers, and some of them were owned by large companies, like there were taxi companies with sometimes with um, exclusive rights to servicing an airport or hotels or lucrative areas of the city. They were unable to compete, and so they try to use the state to quash these companies. But over time, the e-hailing companies have done well and succeeded. And the interesting now competition is between homegrown, locally set up e-hailing companies and international e-hailing companies like Uber. Uber is now in Africa as well, and Uber has an unlimited, resource, and they could go on with a loss under pricing the local market until they drive out everybody else out of the market. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting area, but generally, small businesses avoid from competing with big businesses.
So, Johannes, I want to switch gear a little bit. And again, I really appreciate your time. We have about another half an hour, if that works for you.
I I have to get off in the next 10 minutes. Apologies.
No, it's okay. So maybe this is kind of like a good way for me to, with the last 10 minutes, I wanted to, pivot and ask you to maybe share some advice. So I have students here. There's, geopolitically a lot of stuff going on. I have students who are still thinking, what major do I want? I have a couple actually interested in law. And I wanted to first ask you, I mentioned how we met in Dr. Latanzio's astronomy class 100 years ago. And maybe if you could maybe talk about like the role that community college played for you in your life. And then what advice do you have for a student right now, first year, second year community college, who's trying to figure out what major, what role, what to do? Some born and raised in Southern California, others from all over the world.
Well, that's great. I'm still amazed, Terry, how you remember Latanzio's name. I keep forgetting his name. I'm like,
I love that guy.
yeah, that's amazing. Listen, we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to be able to study at OCC, Orange Coast Community College, after high school as a newly minted immigrant kid. It was a great opportunity for me, a great way to transition from high school to college. But in many ways, you know, the first 2 years of college are really an extension of high school. You're growing as a person. Uh, Academically, I mean, I look at my kids now, what they study in high school. Like my daughter is in the 11th grade. I I don't understand. It's like college level stuff that they're studying. Um, I think high school is a lot easier in my time and our time. But what community colleges do is they give you the space to grow as a human being, as a person. And that's really important. And just the academic growth is alone is not enough. You really have to grow as a person. So the pace the professors, because the professors were not burdened by publish or perish. They had a lot of time for us. We had a lot of time to do our work. And we most of us also worked while going to community college. Uh, it was affordable, and so it was just the right mix of academic, social, and everything else mixed in to help us really grow into something. And then the first 2 years are when you're trying to figure out what you want to do as a major. You just asked that question. Well, many of us thought from high school we knew what we want to study. Um, and you start taking classes, and every class you like becomes your major. I was like, oh, is this what I want to major? And then you take another course, and so because you're still forming, you're still growing as a human being, you're attracted by a lot of disciplines. So it gives you the space and the freedom to explore, but also spend time with your teachers. I mean, in a 4 year university, it's really hard to get that level of attention from a professor. And so, in many ways, that was great in terms of helping us explore, figure out what to do, and that also translates into your grading. You for your colleges have different type of competitiveness, unnecessary level of aggressive competitiveness that results in pushing people on or off in terms of grading, and that you don't need. So, for example, if my kids end up deciding to start with a community college, I would be happy. So, some parents might think of community college as sort of failure. Not for me. I benefited from my time, in community colleges. It was great. Um, so yeah, beyond that though, just on a serious level, you need to know where you want to transfer. You need to know what you wanted to study. At least after the first year, you should have some idea. You should consult with professors, other students, find mentors, and if you're not working, do internships. Uh, these internships will help you make connections to the professional world. If it doesn't help you figure out what you want to do, it will help you eliminate what you don't want to do or what you don't want to study. Um, and then, many of these community colleges have affiliations or relationship with 4 year colleges. See which university, you'll have the better chance of getting in and finishing undergrad. To be honest, now, having 3 degrees and gazillion years of working, uh, your undergraduate degree is not the most important degree. I'm sorry to say this. It's the most important in a sense for your personal development. Unless you're doing a professional degree like mechanical engineering or software engineering, which are very technical and specific. Anything outside of those areas is part of your development. So you're likely to go on have a master's degree. That's when you're really gonna focus and get a proper direction into your professional future. So enjoy your time, have fun, but plan as to what comes next and what you want to do down the road professionally. And it's okay to change your mind. You can change your mind 100 times. At the end, though, you need to graduate with a degree. These days, if you don't have a degree, nowadays, a high school dropout could have a good job and survive. When I say nowadays, it's not even that long ago, it's about 30 years ago. But now, even an undergraduate degree is not enough, right? To be competitive and to have a decent professional opportunity to make a living and start a family, live a decent life. So, plan, organize, try different things. If you know what you want to do, great. Focus on that and go for it. But the world is yours. As they say, the world is your oyster. Don't be limited by geography. Right? We're in a globalized world. I always tell my kids, because my kids lived all over the world. They've traveled to 25 plus countries. They're American. They were born here, but you know, America is not the limit. They can go anywhere. They could be anywhere, whether here in the U.S. or anywhere. Just follow your opportunity. Be adventurous. All right. I hope that's helpful.
Again, I know how valuable your time is. It's good to see you, man, and I really thank you for doing this. It was really, really.
Thank you, guys, and apologies. I'm juggling things. I was supposed to be in my home office doing this, but something came up, and so, but I'm outside, but I'm happy to be able to do this. And maybe next time I'll come in person and have a conversation with the students.
That
So
would be awesome. Thanks, Yohannes.
Thank you.
thank you, guys. Thank you, Terry.
Have a great day, man. See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Well, it was a lot, right? I mean, I know I was thinking about, so he's talking to you the way that, when he taught law and he taught these graduate classes. I know, I think I was thinking like, ooh, wait, slow down a little bit, slow down. Like when he said moral hazard, I'm like, you need to like go back to like second year, dude. So, but were you able to at least, I mean, you were able to get the gist of everything, right? So, and everybody on Zoom, same thing, I just want to make sure that you guys are good, right? And so I kind of want to, first of all, should I stop or should stop recording now? We're good, right? So let me just do that first of all, stop recording.